a man hardened by loss. You've experienced immense loss in your life, your wife, your daughter. How did you identify with the character?
Oh, God, did I lose it? Yeah, there was a certain loss, there was a certain adriftness within my own heart and life and where I was going and what I was doing and how I was going to carry on.
The world remembers Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, the charming, unshakable hero who always walked away from danger without a scratch. But off-screen, his real story has been far more heartbreaking. Behind the tuxedo and the spotlight is a man who has endured loss after loss, tragedies that would shatter most people. What happens when the same disease takes both your wife and your daughter? How do you survive betrayal from Hollywood or the pain of a fractured family? At 72, Pierce Brosnan's story is not just about fame, it is about unimaginable sorrow and the resilience to keep living. A life shaped by loss. Pierce Brosnan's story begins not with fame or fortune, but with absence. Born on May 16, 1953 in Drogheda, Ireland, his earliest memories were shaped by silence rather than comfort. His father, Thomas Brosnan, a carpenter by trade, walked out when Pierce was still too young to even recognize his face. There was no goodbye, no tragic accident, just an empty chair where a father should have been. Pierce would later admit, "I never knew him. I never saw his face." Those words carried the weight of a wound time could never fully close. His mother, May, worked tirelessly as a nurse, but in 1957, she made a heartbreaking decision: to leave Ireland for London in search of work. She promised it would only be for a short while, but that short while stretched into 7 long years. During that time, Pierce lived like a boy without an anchor, shuffled between relatives, his grandparents in Navan, then an aunt and uncle in Trim. Each home came with its own set of rules, its own way of life, but none of them could offer him the permanence of having both parents by his side. In those years, Pierce learned to become invisible. He was the quiet child, the one who never drew too much attention to himself, who sat back and observed the world rather than rushing to take part in it. Teachers noticed there was something in him, though, an intensity in his eyes, a brightness beneath the quiet exterior. But even they couldn't have known how much the loneliness was shaping him, instilling in him a resilience he would carry all his life. By the age of 11, when his mother finally returned with a new husband, William Carmichael, Pierce was already hardened by solitude. William, patient and gentle, tried to fill the void. He taught Pierce how to fish, how to mend things with his hands, how to trust again. Pierce got his first taste of stability. But lurking inward were some of the most brutal lessons learned in life. Love can vanish right before your eyes, and nothing is meant to last. He would carry that lesson into old age. It became, silently, an engine for ambition. He could speak of beginning with nothingness, being disregarded and feeling rejected. Thus, when the aspirations of art and acting came to be pursued, it was fueled with the drive of someone who would never again experience such emptiness. Those stage shows, auditions, and fleeting roles early in his career carried an unspoken tension, a boy who promised to make a life more fortunate than that from which he came. But then again, that sore never completely healed. Even on the rare occasions when fame stroked him, when he was hailed as one of the most charismatic actors of his generation, something about him always kept that part of his childhood alive. It determined not just the choices he made as a man, but more so how he wanted to be a father. Little did he know, the same grief that defined his childhood would return with merciless force in adulthood. Cassandra, his first great love. For a man who had grown up without a stable home, love was something Pierce Brosnan did not take for granted. In the late 1970s, his life was still a patchwork of small theater roles, auditions, and the uncertainty that comes with chasing a dream. And then came Cassandra Harris. Known to friends as Cassie, she was already an established actress, elegant, confident, and magnetic, in ways that lit up every room she entered. To Pierce, she was more than just beautiful. She radiated warmth, the kind of presence that made the world feel less lonely. When they met, Cassandra was a single mother raising 2 children, Charlotte and Christopher, from her previous marriage. Many young men might have hesitated at the thought of stepping into an instant family, but not Pierce. Having known abandonment himself, he recognized the value of belonging, and he embraced it without hesitation. From the beginning, he didn't treat Charlotte and Christopher as if they were someone else's children. He treated them as his own, filling a role he himself had longed for as a boy. His bond with them would become as deep and enduring as any biological tie. Their romance blossomed quickly, and in December 1980, Pierce and Cassandra were married. With Cassie, life felt settled in a way it never had before. For once, there was no fear of doors closing or loved ones disappearing. Their home was full of laughter, love, and the simple joys of family life. In 1983, that sense of completeness grew when their son, Sean, was born. For Pierce, fatherhood wasn't just a role, it was a responsibility he cherished, a chance to give his children the kind of love and stability he had once been denied. In family photographs from that time, Brosnan's smile wasn't the polished charm of a rising star. It was something deeper, contentment, the quiet joy of a man who had finally found home. He would later reflect, "I wasn't a father. I was just Pierce. And then I became Daddy." That transformation was more precious to him than any stage or screen performance. He had found not only love, but a family to protect, nurture, and grow old with. But the happiness was not to last. In 1987, while working abroad, Cassandra began to feel an unusual fatigue and persistent pain. At first, they dismissed it as exhaustion from long days and busy schedules. But when doctors examined her back in London, the truth emerged with brutal clarity: ovarian cancer. The diagnosis landed like a thunderbolt. For Pierce, it was as if the ground beneath him had collapsed. One day, life had full promise, the normal cycles, but the next day everything was above hospital visits, chemotherapy wards, and endless waiting rooms. Over a period of 4 years, Cassandra fought for her life with courage that stunned even those around her. She underwent surgery after surgery, through treatment after treatment, and stood beneath the constant, unrelenting toll of a disease she knew would not let up, all with unshakable dignity. Pierce described himself as the silent partner during those years, always in attendance, always holding her hand, even privately feeling himself breaking. Our son Sean was still a little boy, would sometimes wear a toy doctor coat and pretend for a while that he was treating his mother. It was innocent and sweet, but utterly heartbreaking, because everyone knew the pretend would not change the threatening reality hanging over them. As the disease progressed, Cassandra didn't allow it to define her. She lived beautifully, at her own dictation, and spoke with such love about life and acceptance, even in her weakest times. Whispering toward the end to Pierce, "Please, darling, don't, boy. It's just a life coming to rest." That was always to be tender and devastating. As Pierce buried his wife, he believed no heartbreak could ever cut deeper. But he was wrong. The bond between father and daughter. When Pierce Brosnan married Cassandra Harris, he did more than take on a wife. He embraced her children, Charlotte and Christopher, as his own. The bond was immediate and genuine. For Pierce, there was no distinction between stepchildren and children. Having grown up without a father himself, he knew too well the ache of abandonment and vowed that Charlotte and Christopher would never feel that way. He officially adopted them after their biological father passed away. But long before that, his love for them had already been solidified in the quiet, daily acts of fatherhood, helping with school, showing up for milestones, and simply being there. Charlotte, in particular, shared an unshakable connection with Pierce. She inherited her mother's elegance and luminous charm, but also carried a kindness that was entirely her own. Those who knew her described her as warm, gentle, and resilient, qualities that drew people in just as easily as her mother once had. For Pierce, Charlotte wasn't just a daughter. She was a living reminder of Cassandra's love, a piece of her that continued to shine brightly even after her passing. As Charlotte grew into adulthood, she remained closely tied to her father. Their relationship was filled with quiet strength, mutual respect, and the kind of bond forged not through blood, but through love and shared grief. When she married, when she became a mother herself, Pierce was there, supportive, proud, and ever present. Her children, Isabella and Lucas, became another source of joy in his life, symbols of continuity and hope in a family that had endured more than its fair share of tragedy. But life, in its cruelest form, repeated itself. In the late 2000s, Charlotte began to feel unwell, symptoms that at first seemed mild, almost dismissible. But for Pierce, who had walked the road of hospitals and test results before, there was a familiar dread in the air. The diagnosis confirmed what he feared most: ovarian cancer. The same disease that had stolen Cassandra decades earlier had returned to take aim at his daughter. For Pierce, it registered a shock greater than any other. It was as if he found himself back in his recollections of that dismal nightmare. He had seen the sickness once before, its brutal toll, and now it had come back again, this time to take another piece of his heart. To watch Charlotte endure the same treatments, the same plights, was a torture few could fathom. The rhythm was too familiar for him: exhaustion-inducing chemotherapy, hopeful but uncertain surgeries, endless waiting rooms, stale air, and silent prayers. With all the extraordinary courage of her mother before her, Charlotte faced the trial. She did not wish for pity. Instead, she wanted time. Time enough for her babies. Time enough to imprint memories of her strength in their minds over her suffering. In June 2013, when she was unable to stand being, but never faltered in the fight, she married her true love, Alex, in a small wedding at home. She was dressed in white, and for what was more than just emotional support, she had the crowd on her side, her children. Her body weakened by illness, this was above all a strong statement that in the battle between love and hopelessness, love came through. Then, a fortnight later, she was gone. Thus, life was robbed from Charlotte, dead at the age of 41 years. Much more morbidly, on June 28, 2013, with her children aged 15 and 8. The same difference in years she and her brother had been when their family had begun falling apart. It was a symmetry almost cruelly poetic in its near-sickening perfection. Pierce felt as if history was repeating itself with the most surgical precision, reliving each moment he once prayed would never happen again. In 2013, when he was an active part of the telethon for Stand Up to Cancer, he talked about this awful experience for the first time. "I held the gentle, firm, beautiful hand of my first wife, Cassie, as ovarian cancer took her life much too early. And just last year, I held the hand of my funny, wondrous daughter, Charlotte, before she too died from this wretched, inherited disease." His voice was hard, but the weight of grief from years of sorrow was clear. If losing Cassandra was devastating, Charlotte's death was like living the same nightmare all over again.
Oh, it's very kind of you to say such a thing. Yes, I've been looking for the path all my life.
Keely, his anchor in the storm. After years of heartbreak, Pierce Brosnan wasn't searching for love when he first crossed paths with Keely Shea Smith in 1994. At the time, he was still carrying the heavy silence left by Cassandra's death. Grief doesn't vanish with time. It lingers, reshaping the way one moves through life. So when he attended a beach party in Cabo San Lucas and met Keely, a journalist and television correspondent, it wasn't romance that caught his attention. It was her steadiness, her kindness, the way she seemed to see the man behind the tuxedo rather than the rising star the world already recognized. For Pierce, Keely wasn't an escape from grief. She was a safe space to live with it. In her presence, he didn't have to pretend that the sorrow was gone. She didn't demand that he move on. Instead, she simply stayed beside him through the waves of sadness, through the anniversaries that reopened old wounds, through the nights when words failed him and silence spoke louder than anything. Pierce would later describe her as his compass, his guiding light through the shadows. Their relationship flourished gradually, not marked by the Hollywood emotional palpitating instant silences, but on mutual trust and compassion. Over time, Keely became the person to help him rediscover life as worth living. They married at Ballintubber Abbey, County Mayo, Ireland in 2001 after 7 years of being together. They married quite a while ago, but the ceremony was deep in beauty and history and worth setting up a man who had met with so much loss, only to go on and declare that love still holds a place in his life. Their marriage meant not only stability, but also new life, as it welcomed to its fold 2 boys, Dylan and Paris. To Pierce, becoming a father again after a long has meant continuing in that role, which always meant the most to him, and not about filling the shoes of the hitherto. Dylan and Paris were nurtured with the same enthusiasm Pierce had given to Charlotte, Christopher, and Sean. The new chapter offered healing, new memories, and a stronghold in love as a wholeness once again. Throughout all this, she was the rock for Pierce. The world outside wasn't always kind to her. Tabloids constantly attacked her appearances, with the headlines reducing her to lesser subtitles. By Pierce, no doubt. He defended her fiercely, publicly and privately, declaring, "I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes." His was a loyalty never to be moved, a reflection of the deep loyalty he gave to Cassandra all those years ago. To Pierce, Keely was not only a wife. She was his North Star, who kept him steady in turbulent times that would have crushed another man entirely. Then, in time, Keely's strength became clear to everyone, not just to Pierce. After long years of intense public scrutiny, she was able to undergo her own transformation and focus on her health and wellness for herself, and not for the eyes of others. But even before that, Pierce celebrated her for who she was because, to him, what really mattered was the loving heart, wisdom, and sanctuary she had provided for their family. Together, they created a life that embraced both happiness and sorrow, while acknowledging neither. In their homes, whether Malibu or Hawaii, with the presence of art, music, laughter, and memories, Keely allowed Pierce to bear the anguish of the loss of Cassandra and Charlotte without being swallowed up in it. She didn't take away his sorrow, she helped him live with it. But even love and family couldn't shield him from another crushing blow, this time from Hollywood itself. Tetui Bond role betrayal. For years, the whispers had followed him. Even in the early 1980s, before the world truly knew his name, critics and fans alike predicted that Pierce Brosnan was destined to be the next James Bond. The tuxedo seemed to fit him before he had even worn it. But destiny was not straightforward. Twice he came within reach of the role, only to see it slip away due to contractual complications and bad timing. Then, in 1994, after more than a decade of near misses and heartbreak, the call finally came. Brosnan was Bond. His debut as 007 in GoldenEye was nothing short of transformative. The Bond franchise had been struggling, its future uncertain. But Brosnan's performance reignited the series, drawing in both old fans and a new generation. With his mix of charm, toughness, and sophistication, he embodied everything audiences wanted from the world's most famous secret agent. The film earned more than $350 million worldwide, a staggering sum at the time, and cemented Brosnan as an international star. Over the next 7 years, he would don the tuxedo 3 more times: Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Collectively, his Bond films grossed over $1.2 billion. Brosnan had not only lived up to expectations, he had surpassed them. He performed many of his own stunts, pushing his body to the limit, and carried the weight of reviving a cultural icon with poise. At red carpets, he was the man every journalist wanted to interview, every photographer wanted to capture, every fan wanted to meet. For millions, Pierce Brosnan was James Bond. And then, in 2004, everything ended with a single phone call. He was filming after the sunset in the Bahamas when the producers reached out. There was no lead-up, no discussion of the future, no thanks for the billions he had brought to the franchise. The words were cold and clinical. "You were a great James Bond. Thank you. Goodbye." With that, the line went dead. Just like that, he was no longer 007. The news hit him like a betrayal. Not because he hadn't prepared himself for the possibility of moving on, but because of the way it was handled. For 2 years, producers had secretly been auditioning his replacement. All the while, Brosnan had believed he was still part of the future of Bond. To discover that he had been excluded from conversations about the role he had helped save, that was a wound deeper than the loss of a job. It was the shattering of trust. The fallout was brutal. Within weeks, 3 major film deals collapsed. Hollywood, once eager to work with him, suddenly seemed to view him only through the lens of Bond. The role that had made him a household name now confined him in a cage. Casting directors began labeling him too Bond for other roles, and his once sky-high salary offers plummeted. Staff members he had worked with for years had to be let go as projects dried up. For a man who had weathered unimaginable personal loss, this professional rejection was a new kind of grief, the grief of erasure. His children would later recall how difficult those years were. One story stood out: the night they watched the trailer for Casino Royale, the first Bond film without him. For the first time, they saw their father cry. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was something deeper, a hollow ache that came from watching another man live the life he had once fought so hard to build. And while Hollywood turned its back on him, another heartbreak was quietly unfolding within his own family. The struggle of a son. For Pierce Brosnan, fatherhood was never a role he played. It was the core of who he was. When he married Cassandra Harris, he didn't hesitate to step into the lives of her children, Charlotte and Christopher. He adopted them after their biological father passed away, giving them his name and his love. To the outside world, it was admirable. To Pierce, it was simply natural. He knew too well the emptiness of growing up without a father, and he vowed his children would never feel that kind of abandonment. But grief has a way of reshaping lives in unpredictable ways. When Cassandra died in 1991, the entire family was shattered. Charlotte leaned on Pierce for strength. Sean was still a child who needed protecting. And Christopher, older, more independent, carried his pain differently. He withdrew, bottling up emotions he didn't know how to express, and in time those unspoken wounds began to manifest as something darker. Christopher's struggles with addiction began quietly, almost invisibly at first, but as the years went on, the battles grew harder to hide. For Pierce, it was like watching a son drift further and further out to sea while standing helpless on the shore. He tried everything a father could think of: interventions, rehab programs, long talks, silent companionship. He gave Christopher countless second chances, desperate for a breakthrough. Sometimes there were glimpses of progress, moments of clarity when it seemed his son might finally step out of the shadows. But each time, the darkness pulled him back under. Pierce never spoke of his son's struggles in a way that sought pity or scandal. When he addressed it at all, his words carried the quiet resignation of a man who had given everything but still could not change the outcome. In one interview, he admitted with aching honesty, "Christopher is still very lost. I know where he is, but he's having a hard life. He knows how to get out. He doesn't want to." There was no anger in his voice, only sadness. A father watching from a distance, powerless to rescue a child who didn't yet want to be saved. For a man who had already buried his wife and later his daughter, the pain of Christopher's estrangement was another kind of funeral, one without a ceremony, without closure. Losing a child to death is devastating, but losing a child to life while they're still out there somewhere breathing is its own kind of torment. It is a grief lived day after day in silence, across years, across unanswered calls and empty spaces at family gatherings. Indeed, the love was not disappearing. It had never been questionable. On June 19, 2022, Pierce posted an unusual one as a Father's Day message that included Christopher's name. Just a simple action, but it meant a lot. It was proof that despite how shattered their relationship had been, that door in Pierce's heart is still wide open. He had not given up on his son. He would never. But he had painfully learned that love alone cannot fight all wars. That sadness still resonates as one of the severest secrets weighing on the heart of Pierce. He will rarely utter a word of it to guard against the dignity of his son. But for the closest observers, gloom is very obvious. In the pauses between words, in how the voice softens when family is mentioned. It not only contains expressions of endless love from his father, but also acceptance of the fact sometimes people have to find their way alone, even though that may not be something to watch. Yet, even after everything, loss, betrayal, fractured bonds, Pierce found ways to rebuild his life with purpose. Rebuilding a legacy of love. At 72, Pierce Brosnan is no longer defined by the tuxedo, the Aston Martin, or the shaken martinis of James Bond. His greatest strength today is not in the characters he has played, but in the man he has become beyond the screen. After a lifetime of staggering loss, his wife, his daughter, fractured ties with his son, and the betrayal of Hollywood, he has chosen not to retreat into bitterness, but to rebuild a life rooted in meaning. For Brosnan, healing has taken many forms. One of the most important has been painting. Long before he was known as an actor, he studied art as a young man, and it was during Cassandra's illness that he rediscovered the canvas as a refuge. What began as therapy evolved into a lifelong passion. His paintings, rich with color and texture, carry the weight of his inner world, grief, resilience, and flashes of joy. Over the years, he has exhibited his work and even auctioned pieces to raise money for cancer research and environmental causes. Through painting, he found a way to turn sorrow into something tangible, something that could help others. Family remains at the center of everything. With Keely, his partner of 3 decades and a wife of over 20 years, Pierce has built a home life defined by warmth, loyalty, and devotion. Their sons, Dylan and Paris, are now young men carving paths of their own in music, fashion, and the arts. Unfettered by rules are Charlotte's children, Isabella and Lucas, who carry their mother's light, and Pierce himself carries out his tender duty of being a proud grandfather. Though some ties remain shattered, his love for the family has never wavered, and it is in their laughter and company that he continues to draw strength. The homes resonate with such memory and renewal. For almost 2 decades, Orchid House in Malibu was his sanctuary, an oceanfront retreat of Thai design filled with light and art and the sound of the surf. In 2020, he and Keely sold the property and began shuttling a life between another Malibu home and their cherished retreat in Kauai, Hawaii. The mornings there are easy, sharing coffee with Keely, walking barefoot along the shore, the sweet salt air amending edges of stark memories. This place is not just a symbol of affluence, rather a temple, where love and laughter coexist with mourning. Beyond his personal life, he has become very active in diverse forms of advocacy. A UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, he has worked in the area of children's rights, disaster relief, and all children. Together with Keely, he has funded environmental groups like Greenpeace and the Natural Resources Defense Council, and spoken out about the issues of clean oceans, wildlife protection, and climate change. Cancer awareness has very personal, depending on every speech, fundraiser, and private donation connected to memories of Cassandra and Charlotte. He has tonte, literally and metaphorically, turned suffering into activism by giving his time, voice, and resources. Physically, he approaches health with discipline and gratitude. Daily swims in the Pacific, long coastal walks, and a balanced diet help sustain him. Silver-haired and deliberate in stride, he embodies the dignity of a man who accepts the passage of time rather than resists it. His career, too, continues with quiet selectiveness. He chooses roles that interest him, sometimes dramatic, sometimes light-hearted. But he is no longer chasing stardom. Acting is a craft he enjoys, but it is no longer his defining identity. Pierce Brosnan's story shows us that even the strongest hearts can break, but also that they can heal. His journey is one of love, loss, and resilience, reminding us that tragedy doesn't erase life's beauty. It only makes it more precious. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and watch the next video on screen for more powerful stories of resilience and hidden truths.